Did you ever have to knock on a parent's door when a child OD'd?
Definitely. And probably been one of the most heartbreaking things that I've had to do, is to look into the eyes of a mother or father and deliver that news. It's not news that you want to deliver. And there's not a person in this community, I would argue, that hasn't been affected by this in one way, shape, or form. And so being a co-chair of the Senate's task force on heroin and opioid addiction for me has probably been one of the greatest honors since being elected. I live this. I saw it firsthand, right, working in the trenches. And, enforcement is only one piece of this problem. And there was a time, and I readily admit this to anybody who will listen to me, there was a time in my professional law enforcement career where I thought we could get out of this. We just need to hire more cops. We need to throw more cops at this issue and we'll be fine. And I was so wrong, right? You can't enforce your way out of this particular issue. And it is poisoning the heart and soul of America.
Ten years ago, I interviewed 100 fascinating people and documented their stories in a 2-volume book series. Today, my journey continues. I'll be engaging with captivating guests, having candid, meaningful, and uncensored discussion as I aim to reveal the passion that comes from within, unlocking the mysteries needed to make purposeful change. My objective is to be a connector and enlighten listeners through stories of struggle and success, heartache and inspiration, offering solutions to challenges we face each and every day. This is a broadcast of real people, real stories, and real conversation. Everyone has a story. My job is to ensure their stories are told. My name is Roger Brooks. Inspired by Brian Rose of London Reel and the London Reel Academy and the Broadcast Yourself Accelerator course, I now bring you American Real. Welcome to our third episode of American Real, where in this week's show, our guest is Senator Fred Akshar, a first-term member of the New York State Senate representing the 52nd District. This young senator truly amazed me with his bottoms-up approach, his work ethic, and commitment to serving the people of his district. Before entering the political arena, the senator served the community as a member of law enforcement, as deputy sheriff, a member of the SWAT team, undersheriff, and graduate of the FBI Academy. Known by his peers as the best undercover detective of his day, the senator has taken his learnings from his days on the street directly into the Senate chamber in Albany, where he's working to make purposeful change. He is passionate about making an impact to end the heroin and opioid epidemic and is driven to stimulate the tired upstate economy. This is a 2-part series, the first being in studio. Part 2 is on location and will be released in the near future. Now, if you like today's show, please share it with your friends, like us on Twitter, Facebook, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Real. I'd like to thank Drew Lewis of Big Drew Graphics, who provides us with the incredible drone shots, and I'd also like to thank our partners and sponsors, including Happy Socks, turning an everyday essential into a colorful design item. I'll be wearing Happy Socks each and every episode. And now, without further ado, I bring to you Senator Fred Akshar.
And welcome to American Real. This is Roger Brooks, and today my very special guest is Senator Fred Akshar, 38-year-old New York State Senator representing the 52nd District, where you were sworn in on November 3rd, 2015. Prior to entering the political arena, you dedicated your career to serving and protecting the people, spending 15 years with local law enforcement, rising rapidly through the ranks, doing everything from dangerous undercover work to touching the various levels of operations, having responsibility for over 250 deputies and detectives, and managing a budget of nearly $34 million. You are a graduate of the FBI Academy. You are a champion for crime victims and for protecting young people from dangerous drugs like heroin. You are passionate about strengthening the economy of your district, helping small businesses succeed, creating more jobs, and making our community safer, all while fighting for a fair shake from Albany. Senator, welcome to American Real.
Roger, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. And I can't wait to talk to you about your upbringing and all of your years of service with law enforcement. But first, what is it like taking the floor in Albany? What's it like truly representing the people?
It's an amazing experience. You know, when I walk through the halls in Albany, I, kindly remind myself how incredibly blessed I am to be there, especially when I'm by myself and I'm walking through the hallways. The chamber is one of the most beautiful places on the face of this earth. And, I remind myself how incredibly lucky I am to be afforded an opportunity to travel to Albany to represent the people. It's really it's a humbling experience.
I'm sure it is. And I know schedule-wise, you start back in January, is that right? So
Yep. So the full session, of course, is from January to June. And then when we're through at the end of June, you come back to the district and you work full-time out of your district office. So I'm traveling a couple of times a month to Albany to handle business there. But for the 90% of the time during the ending of June through the first of the year, I'm back here in the district full time.
That's great. And I know you're constantly moving. I had a chance to spend some time with you this week. In the evening, we went to the fair. We did a parade. You were all over the place.
We had a good time. And, I do that for one main reason. We stay so active and we have a very active public schedule because it's the right way to do the job. I think all too often people get into elected positions and they lose sight of what's important.
Sure.
And they become disconnected from the people that they represent. And if you're truly trying to represent the people in your respective community, you need to have conversations with them. And that doesn't happen in an office. Mm-hmm. So I spend very little time in my district office. We spend the vast majority of our time out in the community so I can have those real conversations with folks, understand the struggle.
Sure. No, it's so important, and I observed you, especially at the parade and walking through the fair, and this show, American Real, is really about connecting people. I want to connect people with the world so they could see what others are doing in a positive light. But I notice you have a very good way about you of listening. You're a great listener. And I was just curious, is that from your upbringing? Was that from your training in law enforcement? It's rare today to have a good listener on the other side.
Right. I attribute it to my days in law enforcement. To be a successful member of law enforcement, especially in the detective bureau, where really I cut my teeth. You have to listen. You do less talking and much more listening to people when you're interacting with them. And honestly, in this new position, that's really how I'm going to serve the people the best, is if I'm listening to their concerns, listening to their issues, and then collectively come up with a path to success. How can we figure out solutions to these issues to change people's lives? And, I think all too often when you're out in the field, you hear recurring themes, right? You hear recurring issues or recurring problems. And really that helps drive me. With my focus in terms of, where are we going to put all of our advocacy this upcoming legislative session? Or is there something I can currently do for a community, even outside of the legislative session, to help change the community that I'm representing?
Mm-hmm. No, it's so important. And I noticed your staff was handing out business cards if someone had a concern or a question. I would assume you're very organized following up with these people. How important is that to you?
The top priority. Constituent services is my number one priority in my office. When I was sworn in, The very first thing I did was made sure everybody understood that when somebody calls our office, they're going to get a human being on the other end of the phone. And if somebody calls with an issue or a complaint, looking for help, we were going to respond in a very timely manner. It's one of the most important things that we do, and I'm blessed. I am. I have a very big staff, and we are all like-minded people. We all have the same vision, and we're all dedicated to the people that I represent.
Growing up then, what were your dreams? Did you want to be in law enforcement? Did you have aspirations for politics?
I really didn't. A lot of people who enter law enforcement, you hear this conversation about when they were small children, they knew that they wanted to be a cop. I grew up in a very big family. I'm the eldest of 7 kids.
Wow.
We grew up in a very rural town, Afton, in Chenango County, not too far from Binghamton. And, my father was employed in a blue-collar job. My mom was a stay-at-home mother. And, we just learned about, just working hard, right? Put your mind to something, work as hard as you can, and you'll be successful at whatever it is. Worked my way through college, and my friend was a member of law enforcement. I had a friend who was a 911 dispatcher, and he said to me, why don't you ever think about dispatching? You ever think about becoming a dispatcher? So I went and took the test, and that's really how my law enforcement career started. It was, I was about 20 years old when I became a dispatcher, and I was blessed to have been hired as a member of law enforcement when I was 21. So I got started very young.
So what was the training like? I know there's a pretty rigorous training to I don't know if you call it the academy or
yeah.
what it
So
is.
the police academy was 27 weeks long, and it was a class of about 30 people from all over this region that was getting their training, and it was a long 27 weeks. But I think when you enter into something like that, you know what your goal is, and at the end of the day, you know that you're going to become a sworn member, and you just focus, and you just some of the training is incredibly rigorous. Very taxing physically, on your body, and during those moments, you take things day by day, and you just forge ahead, and because again, at the end of the day, you're going to become a sworn member, and that's what the ultimate goal is.
And that's your motivation, right?
Yeah, certainly, it certainly was, and I was blessed. I mean, my law enforcement career, I spent a couple of years in Chenango County. That's where I started, and then I transferred to Broome in 2002, and I did that for opportunity. I knew that the Chenango County Sheriff's Office was very small, it was very rural. There was less opportunity for upward movement and lateral movement within the agency. Broome was so much bigger, and I knew that there were so many more opportunities. Now, if you would have asked me in 2002 what my life would look like in 2015, I would not have thought this.
Sure.
For me, in terms of my, you asked the question about politics. And did I ever, when did I know if I wanted to do that? As my career progressed in law enforcement and I started to move up the ladder, if you will, I started to really watch the sheriff and see his interaction with people and, the political realm of that particular office. And I was intrigued by it. Mm-hmm. So when I was promoted through the ranks, ultimately becoming the captain, overseeing the entire law enforcement division, that's when really I think I was stung by the political bee, if you will. And I started to really focus in on that, and started to think to myself, one day, would it be possible for me, to follow in his footsteps? So, talk about goals and ends. I think it was at that point in my professional law enforcement career that I really started thinking about, what can I do today to put myself in a better position to maybe one day run for sheriff.
That's awesome. And so, it sounds like he was very much a mentor as well, because you were pretty young at that point, going up through the ranks. And how important was that mentorship to you?
It was incredibly important, and we still have this conversation today, myself and Sheriff Harder, that a lot of the things that I do in terms of politics and being involved in the community, I learned from him. Mm-hmm. And I watched him interact with the people that he represents, and I was always motivated by that. For someone who had been in the business for so long to still go out and do that retail politics, right? Where you're going to every pancake breakfast, you're in every parade that you can possibly be in. I mean, that's the right way to do the job.
Right.
Based on our earlier conversation about having interactions with people that you represent, if you're not out in the community, you have no idea what the needs are for the people.
Right. So it sounds to me in some ways that your feet on the street, if you will, being on the street, being in the community, hearing the concerns, seeing the concerns, that really has to be good preparation for the position you're in today.
Yeah, I would say this, that having my boots on the ground in terms of the narcotics world, where I spent the vast majority of my time in law enforcement before moving into an administrative position, I really think has given me a unique perspective in dealing with the heroin and opioid crisis today that everybody knows. I had the good fortune of working for 3 years in an undercover capacity. I moved out of that and then supervised the narcotics task force with other members of police agencies here locally. So really, spending 5 or 6 years in that environment with a group of dedicated men, right, who really just they put it all on the line to try to rid this community of drugs that are killing our young people. It really has given me a unique perspective in dealing with the same crisis, just in a completely different manner or realm.
Sure. And I want to get deeper into the heroin epidemic, but first I'd like to just talk about your undercover work. Fascinating. I remember watching the political ads when you were running for office, and seeing you in a beard, and did not look like the senator that I know. But as I was preparing for this, thinking, wow, I mean, number one, it's not easy to do that type of work. You're putting your life on the line literally every day, and you're almost living a double life. So tell us about that. I mean, as much as you can. What is that like? How do you prepare mentally every day to go to work?
You just have a really good group or team of people behind you, right? That is going to protect you at all ends, right? They're gonna take care of you. That, so that's a sense of ease. But that position, in terms of working undercover, it's incredibly scary, and depending on what you're doing, but it's work that has to be done, right? It's a means towards an end.
Sure.
In trying to clean this community up. So not everybody does it, and certainly there's a certain shelf life of an undercover operative, especially in a community like Binghamton, which is not that big.
Okay.
So it was just a really good opportunity to use yourself in an undercover capacity, right? Avail yourself to the rest of the team and let them use you for specific cases. Want to build the strongest case you possibly can against somebody who's peddling this poison in our community. But the use of an undercover operative really solidifies a case. So if there was an opportunity to interject an undercover into a particular case or an organization, we did our very best to do that. So it kind of was. I mean, you have to have this ability to turn that off at the end of the day.
Sure.
Right. So you go back home, you still look the same.
Right.
And as I say all the time, you have to change your appearance. Right. You have to fit in to the community that you're working in. And I suppose if I showed up like this, to buy half a kilo of Coke, it wouldn't work.
Sure.
So I did, in fact, have long hair. I had a long beard. And that, of course, was spun on me politically when I decided to run. But, I don't think it didn't gain any traction, because people, I think, appreciated the fact that I looked that particular way because I was serving a very important purpose in the community.
So you talk about a shelf life. What is that shelf life of an undercover agent?
Probably a couple of years, maybe a little bit more. You have to think about in terms of, you're building cases, you're apprehending bad guys, you're sending them away, right? And then eventually they're getting out. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, their sentences are short, and generally speaking, they're coming back into the community where they were sent away from. Mm-hmm. So, you have to start to think about that, right? Mm-hmm. When you're still in the same community, working in an undercover capacity, and some of these people that you have sent away are coming back in. And that had happened to me a couple of times while I was working. So, then the decision really has to be made with the bosses and the rest of the team. Are you spent?
I see.
And when you're spent and people start to recognize you and identify you, for the safety of yourself, the safety of maybe informants that you're using, or the team that is protecting you, it's time to move on to something else and let somebody else come in and do that work.
I see. So let's talk about that heroin epidemic, the opioid epidemic. It is just out of control. It bothers me to no end, really, to think about it in our own community and beyond. And I travel a lot. And as I talk to business people, it seems to be in every community around this country. But again, I think your experience of being a undercover detective and now your visibility in Albany, and I know you're on a task force for this, I think you could do some really good things. But my question is, how do we stop this? How do we fight it? How do we at least, get it under control? Because it is out of control.
Hey, I agree with you 100%. And I mean, if you look at this issue in and of itself is probably, in my humble opinion, one of the most pervasive issues facing communities throughout this great state and throughout the nation, right? And it is poisoning the heart and soul of America. It truly is. So you look at this, for me, I look at this like two sides of the coin. On one side of the coin, we are hemorrhaging, and we're losing literally a generation of people. A generation of young people are dying because of this. The other side of that coin for us is, how do we ensure that the next generation coming up doesn't find themselves in the same exact position, right? So being a co-chair of the Senate's task force on heroin and opioid addiction, for me, has probably been one of the greatest honors since being elected. I live this. I saw it firsthand, right, working in the trenches. And, enforcement is only one piece of this problem. And there was a time, and I readily admit this to anybody who will listen to me, there was a time in my professional law enforcement career where I thought we could get out of this. We just need to hire more cops. We need to throw more cops at this issue and we'll be fine. And I was so wrong, right? You can't enforce your way out of this particular issue. You have to really focus your attention in four main tenets, right? Prevention, treatment, education, and enforcement. When I went to Albany in 2015, there was this very robust discussion going on about how do we deal with this, right? We should, and the mentality of some in Albany was let's strengthen the penalties, let's put more laws on the books. And I was saying the cops have everything that they need. They do. The current laws, the construct of the laws in terms of narcotics, the cops have what they need. Why don't we focus our energy and attention on that prevention, treatment, and education piece? Let's throw all of our money and all of our weight and advocacy behind those three tenets. And we did that. We ensured easier access to treatment in my first year.
Excellent.
We looked at prescribing practices by doctors. Being a co-chair of this task force has afforded me an opportunity to travel around this great state and listen, right? Going back to that listening piece. So we're meeting with community-based providers and we're saying to them, tell us what's wrong with the system. Why are things not working? And how can we change that? And that really drives a lot of the legislative agenda. It truly does.
So are you seeing any of those initiatives work yet? Or is it too soon?
No, I think we are seeing that, especially the easier access to treatment, where people aren't being turned away at the door, just simply by removing prior authorizations, right? So when somebody went to the door of a treatment facility, the administrators there couldn't say, well, we'll have to check with Blue Cross Blue Shield before we let you in, and we have to get a prior authorization. We did away with that and said insurance companies can't meddle in the business of somebody suffering from addiction until at the very least the 14th day of their stay, right? Super important, because now the person is in the system, they're getting the treatment that they need, and we have one review process. No longer can each insurance company use their own review process and come up with their own solution or their own determination whether a person should be or shouldn't be in there. OASIS, the substance abuse state agency, is saying here is the review process. Everybody's to use the same review process, and we're going to come up with the same outcome. You got to get people in the system, and you got to, when they're ready for help, they're ready for help, and you can't turn them away at the door. I'll tell you just one other piece I think was so incredibly important. As we traveled, we listened to so many heartbreaking stories of parents who had lost their children to heroin addiction and overdose. And we would ask the question, how did your son or daughter become involved? And it was because they had a sports injury or they got a tooth pulled.
I hear that so
And
much.
a doctor or a dentist prescribed this young child 45 days, 60 days, 90 days in some cases worth of narcotics. Now, who needs that? Who needs that many pills, right? It came with no education, and it was just given, and it would get filled again. So what we did was we made what I think was a very bold move in saying no longer can doctors prescribe any more than 7 days worth of prescription narcotics, right? And if you're going to prescribe narcotics, you, as the doctor, need to get continuing education, and you also have to educate the person that you're prescribing to. Now, we know it takes a little bit more time, but doctors shouldn't just be signing that script and pushing people out the door with 60 days worth of prescription narcotics.
And is that legislation in place today?
It is.
Wow, that's big.
Yeah, I think that was one of the bigger pieces that came out of the legislative reform package that we did in 2015, and really set the stage to what I hope where you'll start to see a decrease in the amount of narcotics that are being prescribed in the street. You read a lot of stories and you see how many pills are actually being put out on the street. It's really one of the reasons why we do these Shed the Med events. We call them throughout Senate District 52. And it's just part of our ongoing effort locally, right, to try to do our part. Roger, on this particular issue, I truly believe in my core that it's a community issue, and it requires the entire community's response if we're going to win.
Absolutely.
And for far too long, I think there was a ton of stigma around this particular issue where people were not willing to talk about it, or they didn't recognize it, or didn't want to admit that maybe it was a problem, in their respective community or on their street, right? But I think that we're far beyond that. People have a willingness to talk. I'll give you a perfect example. Yesterday we held a Shed the Med event and free Narcan training in Waverly, very small community in the westernmost part of my Senate district. And I was inside in the Narcan training, and I looked out the window, and there were 6 or 8 elected officials that were helping sort medication. And these were elected officials. They were Republicans. They were Democrats. And that's bringing a community together. When everybody, regardless of political persuasion, has a willingness to come out for a couple of hours on a Saturday and volunteer their time and help get rid of this medication, right? We don't want these medicines that were overprescribed for a period of time laying around in people's houses,
Right.
in their bathrooms.
No, it's a
Bring them in, get rid of them. And unfortunately, we are in a position where we have to offer this free Narcan training because we're in the throes of an epidemic. And I say to people all the time when they come in for the training, take this kit, I hope you never have to use it. That's my hope.
Mm-hmm.
But in the event that you do, you have an opportunity to save somebody's life, and we're better for it.
Mm-hmm. So what happens? Kids are prescribed this narcotic by their physician, like you said, 30, 60, or even 90 days. And then what? Is their body craving this drug, so they're either buying it illegally on the street, or how does it go to heroin? How does that happen? Again, in your experience.
Yeah, obviously the body becomes so addicted to the opiate, right? It craves it and it needs it. And then if your supply of opioids is turned off, right? Say you got a 60-day supply and your body really became acclimated to that, and the doctor wouldn't fill your prescription. It's the science of your body, right? It's the makeup of your body. The receptors in your brain are yearning for that opiate. So what do you do? So in terms of just cost, right? I'll go back to my days in law enforcement. There was a program called iStop that was implemented by the legislature, which stopped doctor shopping, right? So if you were addicted, you couldn't go to Dr. A and then Dr. B, right? So it's a database now, and if you have been prescribed narcotics, you're in that database and the doctor can check. So at the time I was a member of law enforcement, and we were doing a lot of pill cases. There were a lot of illegal prescription narcotics that were flooding the street, very expensive. Here in Binghamton, you were paying like $1 a milligram for a pill, and people were selling them. They were making a ton of money. Here comes iStop, right? The implementation of this piece of legislation, which really closed the door on doctor shopping and made getting prescription pills very, very hard, right? Unless you were the actual person that was being prescribed.
Okay.
So we saw this very quick turn on the street from prescription narcotics to heroin. Readily available, very, very cheap to buy. Mind you, an 80 milligram pill is going to cost you $80 when you can buy a bag of heroin for say 20 here. And it's extremely lucrative if you are on the selling part, right? You can buy a bag of heroin in New York City or New Jersey for $2 or $3, bring it here and sell it for 20. It's very, very lucrative on that side. So really, that's in 2009 we saw that kind of that transition from prescription medication into the heroin world. I-Stop was a remarkable piece of legislation. It did very, very good things. I think one of the unintended consequences was that shift from prescription narcotics to heroin. Now, I would not do away with that piece of legislation, right? It was very important and it served its purpose. I just think that's when we saw that transition happen.
I see. So those 4 pillars that you were mentioning that are necessary in your mind to help curb this issue that we have, how long do you see that needing to take effect before we see some results?
I think we have to stay committed, right? I mean,
for the long term.
We do, and I think I go back to that 2 sides of the coin, right? That stopping the hemorrhage and stopping this loss of a generation of people, and ensuring that we're properly educating. I'll talk specifically about what we're doing in the Senate district. You know, I had the good pleasure of succeeding a senator who was incredibly committed to this community for a couple of decades, more than a couple of decades. He started a program called the Yes Safe Choices some 25 years ago. And when I was elected, I had an opportunity to decide to either keep this program or not keep the program. I decided to keep it. We rebranded it. We refocused it. And this is a peer-based program. We're focusing all of the energy on the heroin and the opioid crisis right now. And I hope there comes a time when we can focus our energy on something else. It's all peer-based. There are currently in my Senate district 650 Yes leaders. They're high school students who are going into middle school and elementary school and educating their colleagues and their friends in the same school on the dangers of prescription narcotics, on the dangers of heroin. And, you know, it's a great program because it helps boost these 650 Yes leaders up, really makes them, educates them on important things when they're moving off into the college world and starting their own lives. But at the end of the day, you know, middle school students, elementary school students, I don't think they want to listen to you or I.
Right.
They want to listen to their peers, the people that they look up to. And that particular program has an impact. It's impacting over 5,500 kids a year outside of the 650 leaders. So it's really just part of that ongoing effort.
Grassroots, right?
It is, definitely is.
Yep. So just one more question on this, and then we could move to a couple other topics. But did you ever have to knock on a parent's door when a child OD'd?
Definitely. And probably been one of the most heartbreaking things that I've had to do, you know, is to look into the eyes of a mother or father and deliver that news. It's not news that you want to deliver. And there's not a person in this community, I would argue, that hasn't been affected by this in one way, shape, or form. And, you know, the goal, we talked about this earlier, like going through the police academy, the goal was to become a sworn member. I mean, my goal in this particular issue is to not have to have that conversation anymore with parents, or not have to, you know, listen to parents who have lost their children advocate so strongly about changes in the law. I hope one day we can be talking about something different. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's really what motivates us to try to do everything we can in our power. The enforcement piece is very, very difficult to deal with in Albany. There is a segment of the legislature that doesn't believe in enhancing penalties. They don't believe in creating new laws to deal with this particular problem.
Why?
And, you know, it's about, criminal justice reform. It's about overpopulation in prison systems and county jail systems that motivates some in Albany to not want to have this discussion.
At the risk of our youth?
I will tell you just a very quick story. My first year in the Senate in 2015, we were taking up a bill that would have enhanced the penalty if you sold narcotics to a child under the age of 14 in a park or on a playground, because children were being targeted by these predators, right?
Absolutely.
Would have enhanced the penalty to an A2 felony. and a member of the Democratic Conference from New York City stood up in opposition to the bill and said that he wouldn't vote for the bill because the people that he represented in his community sold narcotics as a means to feed their family, and we would be taking opportunities away from them.
Wow.
And that is the mentality of some, unfortunately. And it's sad because I would offer to that member, have you actually sat across the table and had a conversation with a mother or a father who has lost their child? Have you delivered that news to them?
Because you have.
They haven't.
Right.
And, that's the struggle there.
Mm-hmm.
Fentanyl right now, car fentanyl, this is what's being mixed, right? 100 times, right? 100 more times powerful than heroin itself. It's being used to cut heroin now, right? With no rhyme nor reason. Our laws are not on par with the federal laws. So we're trying to put fentanyl, car fentanyl, and all those derivatives on the schedule so law enforcement has what they need to hold people accountable if they're selling this stuff, right? We passed it in the Senate, and it would not pass in the Assembly, which is dominated by New York City, because again, new crimes, enhancing penalties, and I got so frustrated on the floor of the Senate, and I offered these remarks when the Assembly wouldn't take it up, and the spokesman for the Assembly said, we want to study the issue a little bit more before we make a decision. Well, what is there to study?
Exactly.
Really. I say often too, Roger, that there is a time to listen and there's a time to act.
Sure.
And clearly we've done our listening. We've traveled this state. It's abundantly clear to anybody who has their eyes open and their head not buried in the sand. This is a pervasive issue. It is an epidemic that is plaguing so many communities. So the time to act is now, and that's really, we'll continue to push that and hopefully find a way to compromise with the left in finding solutions. Being in Albany, compromise is a very important word, and you really have to think about that goal, right, that end game, and how do we get there?
Sure. So in your role as senator, you seem to have a very dynamic approach. I watch the way you interact with your staff. I mean, you really care about these people. They really care about you. I appreciate the dinner the other night. My son loved it, so thank you for that. But you seem to have a bottoms-up approach, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. Where does that come from? Again, is it your makeup, your upbringing, your law enforcement background?
Yeah, a couple of things I think in terms of bringing people together or collaborating. I go back to my upbringing in a small town, right, where community was so important, and you had so many interactions with the stakeholders, if you will, or people in the community that you were interacting with. But as I moved through my law enforcement career, I engaged in a lot of participatory management. I thought that was the appropriate way to do things. Law enforcement, of course, is a paramilitary organization, and at the end of the day, you have to make a decision. And the decision that you make as an administrator in law enforcement, that's the decision. It's like being in the military. If you tell the troops you're making a left, they're all making a left. Just the way it is. But, I reflect and I look back on my law enforcement career, and when I became a first-line supervisor, I admit this today, that I went about that the wrong way. I was engaging in too much, I'm the boss, and this is what we're doing, and you got to work harder, you got to produce more, and that affected my relationships with my subordinates. And one day it clicked. It just clicked in my mind, right? It's a hell of a lot easier to move this ship if everybody's rowing in the same direction. So why not engage them in this process, in this plan to meet our goals that the sheriff ultimately wanted, right? So I completely changed the way I was conducting business, and I found very quickly when you engage in participatory management, when the people who are actually doing the work, who have their boots on the ground, when they feel that they are part of a solution, or part of a plan, everybody's rowing in the same direction, and we're all firing on all cylinders, and we're looking very good. We're producing, and I took that change with me as I progressed through my administrative roles to engage more of the people that I was supervising, allow them to be part of the process. And I took that with me when I left law enforcement with my own staff now, currently. I mean, I have a senior management team. We meet once a week, and any major policy decision, any appropriation of public dollars, we talk about. as a team, right? Because everybody has different insight. Everybody has ideas about what we should do or shouldn't do. At the end of the day, the buck stops with me. And I would never skirt my responsibilities or walk away from that. At the end of the day, if we make a decision, it's my decision and I will live with it. But, my senior staff, my entire staff, is dedicated to the people that I represent here in SD52, whether you are an intern in constituent services or you are my public affairs director or my chief of staff. Everybody shares that. What's really important to me, though, is that every member of my staff has a voice at the table, right? We have staff meetings every week where everybody, from the intern to the chief of staff, sits at the table and they have an opportunity to be heard. Because
That's rare today.
You know what, though? Great ideas come from anybody. And I never want somebody on my staff to think, well, I've only been here a year, so I shouldn't suggest that. Or maybe somebody will think it's a foolish idea. I want to create an atmosphere within the confines of my office where everybody has that opportunity to be heard, and collectively we come up with ideas on how we move forward. And we've taken that really out into the community. So we're doing it as an administration, but when I deal with issues, especially big issues, I try to be as pragmatic as I possibly can, take my time, educate myself on all of the issues, and then just make the best educated decision I possibly can. That comes, though, by way of engaging stakeholders, people who actually understand things, right? I do it when I'm dealing with the economy and creating jobs, creating a better business climate, or whether I'm just dealing with any one particular issue in this community. Now, people say, why do you take this bottom-up approach? It's completely unconventional. Well, I'm okay with being unconventional because it's the appropriate way to do this job. All too often, elected officials, bureaucrats, they make decisions in big, comfortable leather chairs from the 30,000-foot level, right? They implement some policy, create some new law. They don't have any idea how the implementation of that policy will affect the everyday person, right? So our position has always been engage the stakeholders at the ground level in the beginning of an issue or at the beginning of a conversation. Does that conversation take a little bit longer? It certainly does. So, obviously we all have deadlines, but I would much rather bump things out a little bit longer, have meaningful conversations with all of the people who are the foremost experts, and then make a decision moving forward. They feel like they're part and parcel to coming up with a solution to whatever the issue is. And really, for somebody in my position, I would suggest you'd be a fool if you didn't engage the appropriate stakeholders. I say this all the time in the economy and the business side of what I'm doing, that you are the foremost experts. You're a small business owner. You know what it's like to struggle to make payroll and pay your taxes. Tell me what the problem is and how I can be part of the solution in fixing it.
Right. No, that's great, and I love the approach. It's very unique, but I think it's an approach that more people need to take in any business. It's just a good, sound approach. And by the way, when I spoke with your staff, one of the things they mentioned along the same lines is that you also meet maybe with the opposing side to get their view. Oh, and I thought that was very insightful.
Absolutely. I mean, we have been meeting with folks since being elected that are on both sides of the issues. And here's one thing that I've really focused on doing since being elected was I may feel a certain way about a particular issue, right, personally and internally. But at the end of the day, I was elected to represent 300,000 people, right, in the Senate district. And there are opposing views on all sides. And, engaging the constituency, speaking to stakeholders, that means the constituency or the stakeholders that may feel completely opposite about the way that you feel on issues. And really, it has happened a handful of times where I had thought a certain way about a particular issue. And after listening to both sides, really educating myself on it, I moved either one direction or another. So it's important because if people, even if you disagree with people, they want to be heard. You represent them.
They want a voice.
So we have done what I think is a good job of affording everybody an opportunity to be heard on issues.
So you mentioned the economy. I heard a stat that there's something around 2,600 open jobs in your district. My question is, and I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this, number one, how do we get people filling those jobs? How do we get people back to work off of assisted living? Of course, those that are gaming the system. What are you doing, and what can the community do to help in this regard to get people back to work?
Let me offer a couple of thoughts on that particular issue. It's about workforce development. It's about on-the-job training. So, in terms of workforce development in OJT, we are investing significant amounts of money at the state level to ensure that we're connecting, businesses locally with the workforce, getting folks trained. There are, between Broome and Tioga County, there are 2,600 open jobs. That becomes problematic because it's very difficult, obviously, to fill those jobs because the workforce isn't trained appropriately. But this is a direct reflection as well back to the heroin and the opioid crisis. I had formed in 2015 a small business advisory council. There are 15 small business owners who sit around a big conference table every couple of months, and they counsel me on all things business related. And really, we form my legislative agenda based on the conversations we're having at that particular table. Okay. And I'm hearing time and time again that we can't find people that will pass a drug test, right? So the heroin and the opioid crisis is directly affecting the workforce as well. But for us, it's about workforce development, on-the-job training, and ensuring that those pieces exist and the appropriate people have what they need to get people educated or ready to go into these open fields. So, for us as well, we have a struggling economy here in the Southern Tier, and I've had personal conversations with the governor about upstate New York, Southern Tier specifically, needs a little bit of help and attention. And, we started this program by ensuring that we got our fair share from Albany. And that's incredibly important, right? When the budget process happens, we want to make sure that all of the money that we're appropriating doesn't go to New York City. It doesn't go to Buffalo or Rochester. Unfortunately, I think you're seeing under this executive a lot of his economic development policies focusing solely on big urban areas in upstate New York, Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse. And
Binghamton gets left out.
Yeah, but you saw last week or 10 days ago the Binghamton Fund that was announced. It's a $20 million pot of money, right? Yep. It's a great program. It's a great program because it allows for local leaders to make the decision on where the investment goes, right? I go back to my thought about bureaucrats in Albany making decisions on where money should go or what policies should be implemented. This is an opportunity for the local folks to put forth a really good plan and for that money to be spent how the local folks feel appropriate. So I applauded the governor when he was in town a couple of weeks ago for paying attention to the Southern Tier, for bringing some money here and letting the local officials invest it as they see fit.
That's great. Congratulations, by the way, on that. That's excellent. What about the university?
Huge economic driver. And
it's growing like crazy.
Yes, it is. And under the leadership of President Stenger, I say this often, President Stenger is a visionary. He truly is. I mean, he is bringing Binghamton University off that campus into our communities here in Binghamton, in Johnson City, and it continues to grow and move. The pharmacy school is going to be a huge benefit to the Johnson City community, as is the downtown center here in the city of Binghamton. Huge economic driver, it growing like crazy, and I think that's wise investment when we can invest in the university and ensure they have everything they need to continue to grow.
Right. So you grew up in a small town of Afton, New York. I think the population is less than 1,000 people, if I'm right. What was it like growing up? What was your childhood like? Now you're in the big city of Binghamton. Kind of culture shock for you?
Yeah, I mean, life is certainly different in a small town, in small communities, but, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Mm-hmm. The things, I am who I am today, because of the upbringing of my mother and father, being around my 6 siblings, growing up in a small community and understanding the importance of helping your neighbor, knowing the importance of collaborating with people who live in a community. I wouldn't trade that for the world. And I think sometimes when you grow up in a big bustling city, do you have more opportunity? You probably do. But does some of that very basic life skills get lost right in translation or in the hustle of a big city? And I had a great life growing up. I learned the value of a dollar very young. I vividly remember having this conversation with my father as a child. It was come time to buy sneakers for school. I wanted a pair of Jordans. And he said to me, son, I've got 7 kids. You're going to get $60 like everybody else for your pair of shoes. You can buy a $200 pair of shoes if you want. Go out and earn $140. You choose to spend $140 on a pair of shoes, you're a fool. But that's your business. It's your money. And
good life lesson.
Yeah. And, I think all too often, especially the generation of today, they don't understand or appreciate the value of a dollar and what it means to earn that dollar.
Sure.
And, not to spend it frivolously. And, I've taken that in terms of, being fiscally responsible into my life now in the New York State Senate, understanding how hard our taxpayers work, understand that they too are trying to feed their families. They too are trying to make their mortgage payment, pay their property taxes. And, one of the greatest things we did in 2015 was enacted the largest middle-class tax cut in the last 70 years. And that's the appropriate thing to do because the taxpayers should be able to keep their own money and should stop sending it to Albany. One of my biggest frustrations being in Albany is they spend money like it grows on a tree. And really, what are our priorities? When you look at the very basic needs of people, of New Yorkers, right? I had this conversation this past year. There were proposals by the executive to build a gondola in Syracuse, right, at the State Fair. There was a proposal, and they're still talking about it today, to put colored lights on all of the New York City bridges. All of those things sound attractive. They sound interesting. But when you have Main Street America, when you have business owners that are struggling to make payroll, pay their property taxes, right? When you have your everyday average citizen that is struggling to pay their mortgage, right? Struggling for one of the caregivers, the mother or father, to find a job, we shouldn't be spending money on things like that. Not even to mention providing the basic of human services to people. Those with developmental disabilities, those with mental health issues, those are very important issues. And we have seen historically cuts in those agencies, but yet we have seen expenditures on things like these colored lights and the gondola in Syracuse. I say do those projects when we have fulfilled our basic moral obligation to provide the basic of human services to people, and Main Street America isn't struggling the way it's struggling now.
Are you seeing a lot of resistance in Albany?
Yeah, because the mentality of some is let's just keep spending and we'll just keep taxing people.
But what happens? I mean, ultimately, are those bills getting? Are those budgets being passed?
They're all
negotiated.
Yeah, they're all. Albany is a negotiation. It truly is. So just this year, in this year's budget cycle, the executive had proposed an additional $400 million in taxes and fees. This is like doubling the expense to re-register your car, or doubling the cost of an inspection sticker.
Which affects
everyday people feel that in their pocket,
sure.
Right? So, we were able to stop that. So anytime you have an opportunity to stop something like that is a good day. And I say often in Albany, being in the majority, the Republicans are in the majority in the Senate, it affords you an opportunity to do things proactively, right? Pass legislation, move on certain economic development projects or public protection dollars, bringing them home, but really having the ability to stop some of this legislation or spending habits really is more important, I think, than some of the proactive things that you have the ability to do.
You strike me as someone who's not afraid to put yourself out there. not afraid to be vulnerable in certain situations. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, especially when it's just the right thing to do. I mean, doing what's right should come very easy. And in terms of you have to make very difficult decisions sometimes. But if they're the right decisions based on the people that you're serving, then you have to do that. And is it comfortable to take jabs and to take a beating from people who oppose your view that you represent? It's not comfortable. However, at the end of the day, when you're doing what's right, that just comes with the territory. I don't think I ever fully understood when I jumped into this arena two things: the complexity of the job, right? How complex the issues were that everyday New Yorkers were facing. And then the other piece that I don't think I fully understood was the amount of time it was going to take to deal with all of those complex issues. This is a 7-day-a-week job, and it's certainly not an 8 to 5 or an 8 to 4 or a 9 to 5. You're going 7 days a week, all day long.
Wow.
But if you're doing the job appropriately, it's what's required of you, and I'm happy to do it.
But on the books, it's considered a part-time.
Yeah, it certainly is. And listen, there are right, wrong, or indifferent. There are members of the New York State Senate, New York State Assembly that have other jobs, and this is, in fact, a part-time job for them. And that's a decision for them to make. And so long as they get elected, every other year, that's their business. I have just taken a different approach. I have, committed myself to this full time, and that's why we're going 7 days a week. 16 hours a day on some days.
So how do you prepare yourself mentally? Because I know your schedule is just crazy. You're hopping all around. You're going to all of these events and press conferences and visiting businesses. Do you have quiet time? How do you prepare yourself? I know you like to go to the gym. What are some of the things you do?
Yeah, definitely like to go to the gym, and I think that's my hour and 20 minutes a day where I can get some free time and just decompress a little bit. And when I'm in that environment, my mind is still working. I'm still thinking. In the evening, when I decide to call it a day, I definitely like to sit and decompress. Think about the things that happened that particular day and how we're going to move forward on those particular issues. But I'm also using that time to prepare for the next day. And I have to thank my staff again, who does a remarkable job in ensuring that I'm fully prepared for the next day. And, I'm briefed out on all of the things that will come across my desk or, my day. Everybody on my staff is a foremost expert in some area.
I noticed that.
Yep. Somebody has, they're the foremost expert in health, in education, in economic development. And,
you're fortunate to have that.
I certainly am, and I lean on them a lot to deal with those particular issues. And I'm educated on the things that I need to know about any one particular project or one particular issue that may be coming across our desk. I go back to that, that team effort and everybody having a voice at the table.
Right. Are there any other issues or bills that's up and coming that are important to you?
For me, I have focused my energy and attention on two major issues: the heroin and opioid crisis, as we've discussed, and then creating a better business climate in this state. I think, I don't necessarily agree with corporate welfare. I don't agree with using hundreds of millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, and giving it to a select few companies that promise they're going to bring jobs, they promise they're going to turn certain areas of the state around. What I believe in, right, is that it's not government's responsibility to create jobs. It's government's responsibility to get out of the way of business owners so they can thrive and prosper. It's the reason that we formed the Small Business Advisory Council. And out of that council in this year's legislative session in 2016, came some of the most sweeping workers' compensation reforms in the last decade. This is a $10 billion a year system. One of the most expensive things that business owners are paying, their comp costs. And everybody around that table said, if you could focus your time and attention on one thing, we would suggest that you tackle the workers' compensation system. Hadn't been touched in 10 years. $10 billion a year system. 49% of the money collected in the comp system goes to the injured worker. 51% goes to special interest. Wow. So if that doesn't send a very strong message that that was an issue that needed to be tackled, I don't know what would.
Sure.
So we dug in this year and we said, no problem. If we are all on the same sheet of music, I'll carry the water. It's going to be like pushing a boulder up a hill, but we'll do it. And at the end of the day, our goal was to save $1 billion. We didn't hit that mark. We saved $800 million. So
fantastic.
Business owners across the state should see, an 8% savings in their comp expenses. And it's things like that, in my humble opinion, will change an economy. It will change the tide of what we're doing. We make it easier for businesses to succeed, to thrive and prosper. They're going to hire more people.
Sure.
They're going to pay people a better wage if they're doing well. It doesn't require a government handout.
Sure. Yeah, it seems like that would just be the effect, the natural effect of it. So you seem to be in pretty good shape. You say you work out. Now, there's a rumor that your first year in Albany, you were going to the governor's mansion for something, and lo and behold, there was someone running from the law. You stopped your SUV, jumped out, and apprehended this person. Is that a true story? Yeah. You have to be careful.
Yes, it is.
So what happened?
My staff must have told you the story. I was leaving the governor's mansion. We were there for dinner. We're having a meeting, and I was going up Washington Ave. My chief of staff was driving, and we went through a red light. A couple of cop cars came to a screeching halt. They jumped out, and they were chasing a guy up the street. So I was yelling to my chief of staff to stop the car. Now, I was in a suit. I had a tie on, and she said to me, what do you mean stop the car? I said, I got to help the cops stop the car. So I jumped out, ran down the sidewalk, and the guy had kind of cut into a building, and helped the cops apprehend this guy. And the cop said to me, are you on the job? And I said, no, not really. I was. And he says, oh, what do you do? And I said, I'm a state senator. And he said, what the hell are you doing out here?
That's great.
So I don't know. Once a cop, always a cop.
That's right. It's in your blood.
Yeah, it certainly is.
It's in your blood.
And they work tirelessly.
Yeah.
The men and women of law enforcement, all first responders. And, I say this often, that I will forever bleed blue because of, what that job did for me. It afforded me an opportunity to give back to the community. And, I just truly believe in the mission of the men and women, who work tirelessly, as I said, to protect our communities. So, first responders always have a very close place in my heart. I sponsor a bill. It's called the Community Heroes Protection Act, which is very simple. It would make it a hate crime if you're specifically targeting a member of law enforcement, EMS, fire, corrections. That is a bill that we passed in the Senate this year, but that I could not get moved in the Assembly. I carry the bill because I believe in it. I think that the men and women who voluntarily put on the uniform every day are being specifically targeted for reasons, for the only reason, because of the uniform that they wear. And I think it's incumbent upon us to step up and protect them when they're serving and being selfless. Sure.
No, there was an incident I remember in New York City not too long ago, a few weeks ago. A woman police officer was shot and killed because of her uniform.
Yeah, and I would note that this piece of legislation is not the be-all, end-all to that. I think that the environment that's currently happening across the nation requires us to take a very deep look into relationships, relationships that law enforcement has with the community at large. We are afforded a unique opportunity here in my Senate district, and I think throughout upstate New York, where the relationship between law enforcement and the community is good, right? We have a good relationship because we communicate. Now, I have an opportunity to bring home public protection dollars where you can invest in specific police departments. And we've been very, very specific with the chief executives of our local police departments, our sheriff's departments, that we're going to appropriate a certain dollar amount to you, but you have to use that money to build relationships, right? I don't want them to use that money and buy a helmet, a riot helmet, or a riot shield. I want them to use that money to implement programs and projects that bring law enforcement and the community together, because we will continue to have that good relationship. We'll continue to not have those issues so long as we communicate. And I say this often as well, that when times are good and the community and law enforcement are together, that helps when something bad happens. God forbid there was a shooting of an unarmed person, or race was injected into some certain issue or a particular incident that took place between the law enforcement and the community. When you've worked so hard on a daily basis to form good relationships and you've built a really good foundation, when something like that happens, God forbid, you can stand in solidarity. You can stand shoulder to shoulder together and deal with the issue as one.
Right.
And that's why we're making those investments.
That's fantastic. The late Senator Tom Libous was certainly dedicated to serving the people of New York. My father was fortunate to serve with him on city council when I was growing up, so I knew Tom and Fran from a very young age, and they were wonderful people to our family and to the community. Talk about that last phone call you had with him that Monday before he passed, and then the Libous resolution. I watched that on YouTube. It was pretty emotional. Seemed to be very emotional for you.
Yeah. He was a political giant. He truly was. And, John Flanagan said it very well. He said, if you were Tom Libous's constituent, your cause was his crusade. And, no truer words have ever been spoken. I have big shoes to fill, and I'm keenly aware of that. And, but I said this that day on the floor of the Senate, and I say it, to anybody who will listen, I'm proudly walking in his footsteps. And when you've had an opportunity to watch somebody like Senator Libous do the job the right way, and I don't really care what has become of, his legal issues, right? Aside from that, if you look at what he did for his constituency, his legacy will live for a very, very long time. Nobody will ever take that away from him. He just did a remarkable job and was just a true public servant. And they're big shoes. He rose to power, being the second in command. And Senate District 52 has a history of churning out some pretty great people.
Absolutely.
Warren Anderson was the majority leader. Tom Libous was the deputy majority leader. And who knows what will happen to Fred Akshar. I just have big shoes to fill.
Well, if anyone could fill them, Senator, you can.
Thank you.
We're very proud of you. One last question before we leave. And speaking of legacy, what do you want your legacy to be?
I just want people to know that I was dedicated to this job, and that I truly cared about issues that people were facing. And I go hard every day, Roger, because it's the right thing to do. And I want people to know that if they voted for me for the right reasons. And the greatest joy I get since being elected, and this is happening to me more and more frequently, from people from we all make the world go round, right? And people from all ends of the spectrum. Somebody who is struggling and may not be working, when they come up to you on the sidewalk and they say, "Hey, Akshar, you're doing a great job," or you have a very prominent person in this community who has done very well for himself or herself financially, when they come up to you and they say, "Hey, Akshar, you're doing a great job." But the greatest thing for me is when somebody comes up to me, I happen to have an R next to my name. I'm a Republican. And when somebody comes up to me and say, "I'm a lifelong Democrat, but you amaze me. You're working so incredibly hard for the people, and I'll continue to support you so long as you do that." I just want to make a difference. I learned this at a very young age, that we all make the world go round, no matter what we do. The guy sweeping the sidewalk in front of the bank is no different than the bank executive. And I think it's incredibly important that we ensure that happens all of the time. People say to me, "You're the senator, you can do this, you can do that." You know what? I happen to have that title, but I firmly believe that we all make the world go round. I am no more important than the next person. And I have a good friend who says to me all of the time, "It's okay to be hungry. Just remain humble." That's how I'm going to move forward.
Awesome. Well, we're so proud of you. Thank you so much for being on our show. It means a great deal to me, and we would love to have you back at some point in the future if you're willing.
Love to do it. Thanks for all the work you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Roger Brooks with American Real. We are on top of the State Building in Binghamton, New York. We are about to have our interview on Sunday with Senator Fred Akshar, who is a New York State Senator, and the interview is going to be wonderful. Please tune in. Watch us on Facebook and also on Instagram and AmericanReal.tv.